Tomorrow is the day that we are all dreading. It's the day that Title 42 is set to expire, which will result in a mass influx at our southern border. Also in the news, we have a mass shooting at a Texas outlet center, which resulted in 8 people being killed. Already, the mainstream media is calling the shooter a white supremacist, while at the same couple of days span, we see another person in Texas driving over 18 people at the southern border. The details are now coming out and it's breathtaking. Also, we have news that Tucker Carlson is now hosting a show on Twitter. All of that and more on today's episode.
Facts over tracks, this and that, spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could gas, think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past.
Starting from the top, we have Title 42, which was implemented during COVID-19 by Donald Trump. It said that because of the COVID emergency, we can't handle all of the people at the border, so we need to send them back. The thought process was that we will handle them as spots open up. So from 2020 to, tomorrow, we would use this law to send back migrants. Since the COVID emergency has now ended, we can't keep this law in the books, so it needs to be removed. But the thing is that it needs to be replaced. But no one in the Biden administration will actually do something and take responsibility and accountability and acknowledge the simple fact that we need a similar law to this on the books to stop immigrants from flooding into the United States. Without a law like this on the books, there is no way that the United States can actually turn these migrants away. Well, of course they can, but they wanted an excuse to make them sleep easier at night. The solution is that we need to put a law on the books that is a set amount of migrants that can come into the United States on a given year, so we don't get overwhelmed. And our systems can actually do what they are supposed to do. Starting tomorrow, it's expected that we're going to have 10,000 migrants coming into the southern border every single day, which would mean that after 365 days, the total amount of migrants that will flood through the southern border will be 3,650,000. And that is only the documented immigrants. The undocumented immigrants, also known as gotaways, or the people that Border Patrol could not get their hands on. So there's no record of them actually coming through the border, but we know that they did. Of course, nobody in the Biden administration will actually acknowledge the simple fact that the Trump administration was on the right track with a legislation like Title 42, because of course AOC had her little propaganda-style Instagram photo shoot in front of an empty parking lot on the southern border to show that she's crying for these immigrants. Also, it's very convenient that during the Trump administration, we go and call the people sitting at the border kids in cages. But during the Obama administration, we call the same exact thing playtime or daycare. And just like the Obama administration, the mainstream media is giving back this nickname for the Biden administration, even though nothing changed on that front. We're going to be seeing a catastrophic disaster which has Joe Biden's name written all over it in permanent marker. And the only way that he's going to be able to make this wrong a right is by introducing legislation that will permanently alter the way migrants coming in through the southern border and migrants that are processed are actually processed. But we know that the Biden administration will never do anything close to this because of the fact that the mainstream media is in Joe Biden's pocket and they will never hold him accountable for anything that he does. If this is a truly catastrophic shit show, for lack of a better word, the mainstream media will never report on it, so it will never even be a thing. With that being said, let's dig into the headlines of the week. Before we move on, I wanted to let everybody know that there's a new show coming out called Dimitri's Book Club, launching May 28th. In this series, we will talk about Ron DeSantis' new book, The Courage to Be Free, and next we will be covering Candace's book, Blackout. Very interesting books coming right here on YouTube, but of course, exclusive content is being uploaded on my members section over on Spotify. So go check that out whenever you have the chance. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Moving to the first headline of the week, we actually have Tucker Carlson keeping his show on Twitter. So, Tucker Carlson announces new show. This is from the Daily Wire. Former Fox News host Tucker Carlson announced on Tuesday afternoon that he is launching a new show that will be hosted on Twitter. Carlson's announcement comes after reports surfaced in recent days that he had spoken with Twitter CEO Elon Musk about working together. Carlson made the announcement in a video posted on Twitter where he mentioned that there were not many free speech platforms left in the world. Quote, "The last big one remaining in the world, the only one, is Twitter, where we are now," Carlson said. Twitter has long served as the place where our national conversation incubates and develops. Twitter is not a partisan site. Everybody's allowed on here. And we think that's a good thing. Quote, "And yet, for the most part, the news that you see analyzed on Twitter comes from the media organizations that are themselves truly distinguished propaganda outlets," he continued. Quote, "You see it on cable news, you talk about it on Twitter. The result may feel like a debate, but actually the gatekeepers are still in charge. We think that's a bad system. We know exactly how it works and we're sick of it." Quote, "Starting soon, we're going to be bringing a new version of the show we've been doing for the last 6.5 years to Twitter," he concluded. "We'll be bringing some other things too, which we'll tell you about. But for now, we're just grateful to be here. Free speech is the main right that you have. Without it, you have no others. See you soon." We're going to actually be watching this clip here because I do 18 million views. Oh my God, CNN could never. Let's watch this thing. I'm excited for this because I will be watching this video every single day. I will be watching his show because I watched his show before. And I'm not watching Fox News now. I don't even turn on the channel.
You often hear people say the news is full of lies, but most of the time that's not exactly right. Much of what you see on television or read the New York Times is in fact true in the literal sense. It could pass one of the media's own fact checks. Lawyers would be willing to sign off on it. In fact, they may have. But that doesn't make it true. It's not true. At the most basic level, the news you consume is a lie of the stealthiest and most insidious kind. Facts have been withheld on purpose, along with proportion and perspective. You are being manipulated. How does that work? Let's see. If I tell you that a man has been unjustly arrested for armed robbery, that is not, strictly speaking, a lie. He may have been framed. At this point, there's been no trial, so no one can really say. But if I don't mention the fact that the same man has been arrested for the same crime 6 times before, am I really informing you? No, I'm not. I'm misleading you. And that's what the news media are doing in every story that matters, every day of the week, every week of the year. What's it like to work in a system like that? After more than 30 years in the middle of it, we could tell you stories. The best you can hope for in the news business at this point is the freedom to tell the fullest truth that you can. But there are always limits. And you know that if you bump up against those limits often enough, you will be fired for it.
Yeah.
That's not a guess. It's guaranteed. Every person who works in English language media understands that. The rule of what you can't say defines everything. It's filthy, really, and it's utterly corrupting. You can't have a free society if people aren't allowed to say what they think is true. Speech is the fundamental prerequisite for democracy. That's why it's enshrined in the first of our constitutional amendments.
Yeah.
Amazingly, as of tonight, there aren't many platforms left that allow free speech.
Nope.
The last big one remaining in the world, the only one, is Twitter, where we are now. Twitter has long served as the place where our national conversation incubates and develops. Twitter is not a partisan site. Everybody's allowed here, and we think that's a good thing. And yet, for the most part, the news that you see analyzed on Twitter comes from media organizations that are themselves thinly disguised propaganda outlets. You see it on cable news, you talk about it on Twitter. The result may feel like a debate, but actually the gatekeepers are still in charge. We think that's a bad system. We know exactly how it works, and we're sick of it. Starting soon, we'll be bringing a new version of the show we've been doing for the last 6.5 years to Twitter. We'll be bringing some other things too, which we'll tell you about. But for now, we're just grateful to be here. Free speech is the main right that you have. Without it, you have no others. See you soon.
Okay, so I don't know if you... I mean, this is not overstating exactly how I feel, but there's no other media personnel that can sit here and come back after firing and feel more powerful. I had chills while watching the video. There's no other media personnel that I watch that has been fired from their job and is now doing a better job after they are fired. It's always the opposite. They were always doing a better job before they were fired. And then when they went on their own, it just completely fell apart because they had no idea what they're doing. Tucker Carlson, people are watching Tucker Carlson for Tucker Carlson. It doesn't even matter if he has all these fancy lights, all this fancy studio with a TV in back of him. No, he can sit there in the middle of a park and put on an hour show, and I will sit there and watch it every single day. And I promise you this, I will watch his show every single day when he uploads on Twitter, because I know for a fact that it's going to be even more extravagant, more in-depth than what he was giving to Fox News. And the show on Fox News was very in-depth on its own. But I mean, not getting right off the main topic here, we all know the real reason why he got fired. It's because he stepped on too many toes. Let's move on with the article. Carlson's high-profile attorney, Brian Friedman, who was also retained by a recently fired CNN co-host, Don Lemon, said in a statement, quote, "The idea that anybody is going to silence Tucker and prevent him from speaking to his audience is beyond preposterous." The report said that Carlson has been busy plotting a media empire of his own after being sidelined by Fox News, but is unable to do anything unless they let him out of his contract. Carlson's move to Twitter follows Daily Wire host Matt Walsh's move to the platform following YouTube censorship. And I completely agree. Everybody should move to Twitter. I'm actually looking at moving my show to Twitter, not fully, but also in collaboration and coordination with the other platforms for the time being. But it's a long process. But I will let you guys know when we are actually moved our show over to Twitter, because might as well. Moving on to the next article, we actually have the New York Post. We have Texas mall shooter Mariaco Garcia's twisted diary revealed. Paranoia, racism, and sick fantasies. Journal entries apparently written by the Texas mall shooter Mariano Garcia detail his hatred toward women and several races, including his own Hispanic background, and a perverse devotion to the Aryan race. Over 100 pages of the handwritten diary were posted as pictures along ID cards, snaps of Garcia with Hooters waitresses, his guns, and racist tattoos on a since deleted profile on a Russian social media site viewed by the Post. The demented rants include messages supporting Nazism and reminiscing about when he has become a full-blown white supremacist. Don't they care about the future of their race? The 33-year-old security guard wrote in one rambling post referencing historical moments that failed to, quote, wake white people up. Quote, "They're sick like children. Everything has to be done for them. When are you going to grow up? Can't you Iran's do everything? Anything by themselves. Sick. Darn those Aryans. Maybe they're sick, not worth saving. Iran's of the world. Raise your hands up right now or you're all going to die." Garcia, who killed 8 before being shot dead by police, later added, quote, I used to think to myself as a Benny from the Sandlot, an all-American kid who just happens to be not white. I'm just a visitor. I'm a Hispanic whether I like it or not. If the kids' baseball movie, The Sandlot, the character Benny leads a team of kids and eventually goes on to become a pro ball player. Okay, so I'm going to actually show some of the pictures here. So we have the first picture, we have him flipping off the camera, and then we have swastikas on his chest over here, not good. Garcia's adherent screens also targeted women and people of Jewish, Asian, and Indian descent, among other populations. He also wrote about his short-lived stint in the United States Army, who confirmed he had been kicked out during basic training over the state of the mental health, saying that he had never been around so many white people. And you know what? They weren't racist. They weren't the racist. The media made them out to be. I then met actual white nationalists, and when I became full-blown white supremacist, one of my white friends actually said, "I'm not a racist compared to you." He bizarrely bragged. In another post, Garcia described how he believed Western man towers over everybody. And then on his diary, he actually carved into a diary of a psychopathic child. And that's the image of the journal shared on his social media page. And then this is the first page. When they didn't, I was like a Virgil in the call to the autumn episode of the Dragon Ball 2. Darn, those idiots, don't they care about the future of their race, their life, children, everything has to be done for them. When are you going to grow up? Can't you, Irons, do anything by yourself? Darn those Irons, maybe. They're not worth saving. Irons of the world, raise your hands right now, or you are all going to die. William Luther Pierce said something similar in his Diversity is Our Strength podcast. Even Michael Savage said, "You deserve to lose your country." I used to think of myself as Benny from the Sandlot, an all-American kid who just happens to be not white. I was just a visitor. I'm a Hispanic. Irene, whether I like it or not. Other parts of the diary, Garcia described both his apparent hate for women and lusted after them. In entries, he frequently refers to women in derogatory terms and uses vile terms to describe them. In one entry, he wrote, There's no way in hell I would ever sleep with a woman of a race I hated unless it was rape, because rape is a special kind of evil." At other times, Garcia, who reportedly called himself an incel, short of the involuntary celibate, wrote about women he had crushes on, professing his love for certain girls he appeared to know, saying he touched himself while thinking about them. He imagined himself in heroic terms whenever he interacted with them. In one entry titled 10-6, The Day of Awesome, Garcia describes how two girls were sympathetic toward him after he had injured his foot and been at the hospital for treatment. Armed with an automatic assault rifle, Garcia killed 8 people and wounded several others over the course of 4 minutes outside of a mall in Allen, Texas on Saturday. And then he is seen here posing with a Hooters girl. And then he posted a picture of his guns right before the shooting. Police have said that he arrived at the Allen Premium Outlets at about 3:36 p.m. when he hopped out of the gray Dodge Charger and opened fire. The 8 victims, including 2 sisters and 3-year-old boy and his parents. An Allen police officer who was responding to a different call in the area, rushed to the scene and fatally shot the heavily armed Garcia. A video appeared shortly after the carnage on a YouTube page investigators believed was linked to Garcia. The clip shows Garcia taking off a screen mask and asking visitors, "Not quite what you were expecting, huh?" As the social media site where Garcia posted his journal entries, the shooter posted an animated picture of a bear standing next to a full moon. And he posted, "Moon's full, losers. See you in the morning." May 5th, on Friday, 2023, the post stated, just read that. The hundreds of photos and journal entries posted on the social media site over the past several months were deleted Tuesday afternoon. They included pictures of his tattoos, including a black swastika covering the left side of his chest. Garcia's page also featured several photos of other people wearing swastikas in Nazi regalia. and even a Nazi wedding with a bride and groom in uniform. My kind of people, he captioned the photos. Garcia also shared images of himself smiling with Hooters girls and screenshots of a movie star Renee Zellweger. Now, that's a girl who knows how to make a guy smile, to drive a guy crazy, he wrote. Other images showed several rounds of ammunition and boxes of bullets with the caption, locked and loaded. Alongside images of guns, he wrote, me testing out my toys. Garcia's stepfather told the Daily Beast Monday he and his father want answers just as much as the public. You know how people are feeling about this, the horrible thing, he told the outlet. Believe me, it's horrible. It is horrible. It's very horrible. You know it's horrible. That's the statement that he gives because he doesn't speak English well. So I don't really blame him for not actually knowing what to say. What do you actually say in this situation? There's nothing you can say in this situation that makes the situation better because this is a really bad situation. You know, that's the same exact statement that the father said. Moving on to the next segment, we actually have the media's takes.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take I got no love.
So moving into the first article, we actually have a CNN article. Why we don't entirely know what will come after the United States debt default. Listen, we're not defaulting on our debt. That's number one. We're not defaulting on our debt. But we can't say, oh, we need to sign this bill right now. We need to sign this bill right now. And then this bill isn't going to just pay for our bills. It's going to be for new spending. Because the thing is that every single year in the United States, we have a budget for the year, like what we're supposed to be doing as American citizens anyway. I budget my money every single week. I put in all my transactions. I count everything. I make sure that the money coming in is the exact same, if not less, than the money that I am taking out every single month, which the United States does on a large scale. They have yearly budgets that they need to follow. If they go over budget, they need to sign a bill that pays for that thing. So that means that they need to make sure that everything's paid for every single year. But of course, over the last couple of years, we have blown over the budget every single year. And of course, we can pay the minimum balance off, but the interest on this debt is just going to get higher and higher as we try to fight inflation. So the Joe Biden administration put themselves in a box that if they try to fix inflation, the interest rates go up. If the interest rates go up, then the bonds that the banks are holding actually devalues because nobody wants those bonds anymore because you lock your money into bonds. Now, if the bank needs money because there is a run on the bank, like everybody's taking out their money, just like on First Republic Bank or CVB Bank, people took out their money so fast that they didn't have any money to give to them, and they needed to take out the investments that they had, which were bonds. The bonds were less money than they actually first bought it for, so they lost money. And not only that, the money wasn't there that they first put in because it was devalued. Now, because of this, they had no money. All the bonds are devalued, and then the FDIC had to step in and cover those funds. The FDIC gets their money from the United States government, and then the United States government has to pay the FDIC off. Now, because of the fact that we're just printing money and giving it back to the FDIC to give back to the people, the interest rates go up because that's inflation. We print money, we have more of that same exact money, so that means that the currency is less valuable because we have more of it, which means that the interest rates go up, again, to fight inflation, and then the inflation rates go up in return of the interest rates go up. If it's hard following that, that's exactly what's happening in the United States now. It's hard to follow. It's very, very interesting what's going on. And Merrick Garland, in the military, for some reason I said that. No, he's not doing anything, obviously. But obviously, all of the Biden administration is doing absolutely nothing. I can't think of the exact person that messes with the inflation rate. Yeah, the person that's in charge of the interest rates is actually Powell, which actually knows exactly nothing about interest and all of this. He doesn't know anything. I don't know why he doesn't know anything, but it looks like he just dropped out of high school. CNN politics. While we don't entirely know what would come out after a United States debt default, which, like I said, we're not going to default on our debts. So CNN, stop fear mongering. CNN, the warnings about a United States debt default is the earnest and urgent. Default would cause a Social Security shutdown, according to the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. There would be an economic calamity, according to the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. For a Republican prediction, look to the widespread job losses, decriminalize. For a Republican prediction, look at the widespread red. Oh my God, I can't talk today. Let me try this again. For a Republican prediction, look to the widespread job losses, decriminated retirement savings, and a higher borrowing cost anticipated. For a Republican prediction, look to the widespread job losses, decriminated retirement savings, and a higher borrowing cost anticipated by Joshua Bolten, the CEO of Business Roundtable and the former White House Chief of Staff under President George W. Bush. Negotiators between the White House and the congressional Republicans just got underway Tuesday, with the first in-person debt meeting between President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and other leaders. Moody's analysis also predicted a 2008-style crisis with spiking interest rates and plunging equity prices, even if a brief breach of the debt limit. CNN's team Tommy Lumby and Elizabeth Birchwold have documented these possible outcomes, 5 ways a debt deficit could affect you. But for all the warnings, the specifics of the United States will cross the so-called X date when the countries could default, and what could happen with the immediate aftermath of a maddeningly vague. We don't know the X date. It is impossible to predict with certainty the exact date when Treasury will be unable to pay the government's bills, Yellen told McCarthy in last week's letter. She said that the X date could arrive as soon as June 1st. Other estimates, like this one from the Bipartisan Policy Center, suggest the X date could occur anytime between early June and early August. Uncertainty about the consequences, the specifics of what exactly will happen, seem a bit like forecasting a hurricane. There is a predicted path, but nobody really knows what will happen when the storm makes landfall. While there have been periodic standoffs with the CNN, you're not making any sense today. While there have been periodic standoffs over the debt ceiling during the past periods of divide, okay, let me just start the whole thing over. CNN, the warnings about a United States debt default in the earnest and urgent. Default would cause a Social Security shutdown, according to the Senate Minority Leader. The warnings about a United States debt default are earnest and urgent. Default would cause a Social Security shutdown, according to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. There will be an economic calamity. The warnings about a United States debt default are earnest and urgent. Default would cause a Social Security shutdown, according to the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. There would be an economic calamity, according to the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. For a Republican prediction, look at the widespread job losses, decriminated retirement savings, and a higher borrowing cost anticipated by Joshua Bolten, the CEO of Business Roundtable and the former White House Chief of Staff under President George W. Bush. Negotiations between the White House and congressional Republicans just got underway on Tuesday, with the first in-person debt default meeting between President Joe Biden, White House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and other leaders. Moody's analysis has predicted a 2008-style crisis with spiking interest rates and plunging equity prices. Even if it's just a brief breach of the debt limit. CNN's Tammy Lundby and Elizabeth Butchwold have documented there to be 5 ways that a debt default could affect you. But for all of the warnings, the specifics of the United States will cross the so-called X date when the country could default, and what will happen in the immediate aftermath are maddeningly vague. We don't know the X date. It is impossible to predict the certainty of the X date with the Treasury when the Treasury will be unable to pay the government's bills, Yellen told McCarthy in a letter last week. She said that the X date could arrive as soon as June 1st. Other estimates, like this one from the Bipartisan Policy Center, suggest the X date could occur anytime between early June and early August. Uncertainty about the consequences. The specifics of exactly what will happen seem to be a bit like forecasting a hurricane. There is a predicted path, but nobody really knows what will happen when the storm makes landfall. While there have been periodic standoffs over the debt ceiling during the past periods of divided government, a default has never occurred. And it's important to note that Lumby and Butchwold that the government does not simply cease to operate. Quote, to be clear, a debt default does not mean all payments will stop and people would permanently lose out on money that they are owed. They wrote, Treasury would have the funds to satisfy some obligations, but it's not too certain about how the agency would handle the disbursements. Much would also depend on how long it takes Congress to address the borrowing cap. Yellen would have to decide whether to prioritize creditors who own debt or the many people who rely on the government money for their paycheck or retirement benefits. Thus, Schumer's prediction that Social Security would shut down seems unlikely, although payments could be delayed. More danger in a protracted default. Some of the worst predictions are based on the event that lawmakers do not quickly come together when markets get spooked by a lack of action. In the scenario of a protracted default, a recession would cost millions of jobs and drive up the unemployment rate, according to a report from the White House Council of Economic Advisors. One likely effect in any default is that simply having the debt would be expensive. Confidence in the United States paying interest on the debts will be shaken. Rates would likely go up. The monthly United States balance sheet. But in the immediate term, there is a distinct lack of clarity what the Treasury Department would decide to pay and what it might not. For an idea of what it's facing, look at monthly's Treasury statement, the most recent of which is from March. Receipts, $313 billion. In March, the government brought in $313 billion in total receipts, including $151 billion from individual income taxes, $133 billion from social insurance and retirement taxes, which includes Social Security payroll taxes, and $11 billion in corporation income taxes, among other sources. Outlays. $691 billion. In March, the government doled out $115 billion. Okay, so we're spending more than what we're making. Look at this. We actually took in $313 billion, but we're giving out almost $700 billion. How are we spending almost 2 times the amount that we're actually taking in? How is that even... how are people not saying alert, alert? This is not good. How can we sustain ourselves? Okay, so in March, the government doled out $115 billion for Medicare, $115 billion for Social Security. Right there is exactly how much we make every single year. $87 billion for income security, and $86 billion for health spending, $84 billion in national defense, and $67 billion for interest on the debt. $67 billion for interest on debt. Oh my God, that's crazy. That is just crazy. Oh my God. How many millions of Americans get a regular check from the government? There are more than 2 million federal civilian workers, millions of federal contractors, and around 1.4 million active duty military members, plus all of the dependents who rely on them. Delays to their paychecks, if it were to come to that, would ripple out into the economy. The number of retirees, disabled workers, and others who receive monthly Social Security benefits is much larger, at about 66 million. More than 1/3 of United States households get Social Security payments, and separately, more than 1/3 of households are covered by Medicare, according to census data from 2020. Nearly 1/4 of households get federal help with health insurance for either adults or children. Why not simply raise the debt ceiling? Why not? Why not? Wait, is this the solution you're coming to, CNN? Are you serious right now? Are you serious? Why not just simply spend more money? I know that we just spent 2 times the amount that we took in. We took in $313 billion. We gave out $695 billion. Why not spend more? Why not spend more? Oh my God. Oh my God. CNN, you can't be. Why not? Why not just simply raise the debt ceiling? I don't know, because we can't afford it. I'm done with CNN. I'm moving into the next article. Moving on to the next retarded article, we have MSNBC. Liz Cheney rolls out anti-Trump ad ahead of CNN town hall. Cheney's Political Action Committee is airing a January 6th inspired ad in New Hampshire at the same time that CNN is hosting a Trump town hall in the state. Liz Cheney wasn't kidding when she committed to a Trump-focused future upon leaving Congress. The Wyoming Republican, a critic of former President Donald Trump, who co-led the House investigation into his effort to overturn the 2020 election, has vowed to break his control over the Republican Party and said she would do whatever it takes to keep Trump out of the White House after she was soundly defeated by Harriet Higdman last year in Wyoming. The Wyoming Republican, a critic of former President Donald Trump, who co-led the House investigation into his effort to overturn the 2020 election, has vowed to break his control over the Republican Party and said that she will do, quote, whatever it takes to keep Trump out of the White House after she was soundly defeated by Harriet Higdman last year in Wyoming's GOP primary. Higdman, an election denier, and staunch Trump supporter, went on to win the general election and success Cheney in the House. The former president backed her campaign while publicly deriding Cheney and engaging his followers to do the same. Now, Cheney's Political Action Committee has dropped an ad titled Risk, which features her discussing the danger Trump poses to democratic norms. Democratic just means liberal. Liz Cheney, you're not going to win the Republican. You're not going to win anything. Just stop right here, just stop. President Trump is not the only president in American history who has refused to guarantee the peaceful transfer of power, Cheney says in the ad. He lost the election and he knew it. Okay, so on January 6th, he conceded. Do you not understand this? Every single president or past president has the right to say, you know what, I don't think that this election was a fair and just election. I think that we should do some investigations. Some investigations took place, and he conceded. He says that there is fraud in the 2020 election. Okay, so he has the freedom of speech to do so. What's your point? NBC News reports that the ad will air in New Hampshire, which will host the first GOP presidential primary and will coincide with a Trump-centered town hall event that CNN is hosting in the state on Wednesday night. Oh, so this is actually today. Rather than accept his defeat, Cheney says in the ad, Trump mobilized a mob to come to Washington and march on the Capitol. Then he watched on television while the mob attacked law enforcement, invaded the Capitol, and hunted the vice president. She concludes by saying Donald Trump is a risk America can never take again. Okay, so we're going to actually, obviously, watch this so I can hate Liz Cheney even more. Let me see this. Okay. Let's watch this now.
Donald Trump is the only president in American history who has refused to guarantee the peaceful transfer of power.
Joe Biden
He lost the election and he knew
to
it.
become the president.
He betrayed millions of Americans by telling them the election was stolen.
Stop the
He
steal.
ignored the rulings of dozens of courts. Rather than accept his defeat, he mobilized a mob to come to Washington and march on the Capitol. Then he watched...
Which is our First Amendment right, by the way. Liz Cheney, you're forgetting that our First Amendment right is to peacefully protest against the government of the United States. We have the right to peacefully protest against the United States, which is stated in our First Amendment right. What are you going to say? Our Second Amendment right does not say that we can bear arms? What are you talking about?
television while the mob attacked law enforcement, invaded the Capitol, and hunted the vice president.
Okay, so you're focusing on January 6th. How about the mob that invaded people's businesses on the summer of 2020? How about the businesses that were burned to the ground in the BLM George Floyd riots? How about those things? But you're not going to focus on those. No, you're going to focus on the one day in history the Republicans were tricked from FBI and private FBI paid people to have them march into the Capitol building, and Antifa members that were doing most of the harm on this day. And you're going to sit here and talk about this day?
He refused for 3 hours to tell the mob to leave. There has never been a greater dereliction of duty by any president. Trump was warned repeatedly that his plans for January 6th were illegal. He didn't care. And today, he celebrates.
No, first of all, he did care, and he was telling Capitol Police to go, but they were waiting in buses outside of the Capitol, not doing anything. So who are we going to really blame here? No, we're going to blame the amount of police that were not present on that day. Because, of course, we're going to have all of the National Guard called in and ready on the George Floyd riots, and then they're not going to do anything. And on the same exact time, we're going to have the Capitol unarmed and have every single policeman and Capitol policeman disarmed and told to go home. But, of course, we're going to have a bunch of thousands and thousands of people show up that day.
Those who attacked our Capitol. Donald Trump has proven he is unfit for office. Donald Trump is a risk America can never take again.
The Great Task is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Yeah, no, Liz Cheney, you're definitely not going to win with that ad at all. When Trump is in 60%, you're being desperate for votes. Nobody's going to vote for you. You have 1%. In polling, you have 1%. Trump has 56. You have a lot more to go. And this ad is not it. This is not resonating with Republican voters at all. This ad does not provide in much terms what the newsliness or creativity, though. It points to the danger posed by Trump are well taken. This is from MSNBC. In my view, all of the things Cheney says about Trump's responsibility for the January 6th attacks essentially repeats the things she said during the House January 6th committee's hearings and the footage, harrowing as it is also likely to be familiar for many. To me, the interesting thing about the ad is Cheney's choice to release it, and it would suggest about her political future. Cheney is a MAGA movement outcast, but that's not an indication she has moved away from many of the conservative views that made her a Trump supporter in the first place. And there's no indication that she's completely done being a political figure either. Okay, so with this ad, you angered the left because this MSNBC news propagandist does not even want to vote for you, and then you just distanced yourself from Republicans. So you're not going to win at all. I will be surprised if your poll numbers don't actually drop in return of this ad that you dropped. Stupid. I'm moving into this next article. We actually have the Daily Wire. We have police identity suspect accused of mowing over 18 people near border has extensive criminal record. Of course he does. Law enforcement officials in Brownsville, Texas, identified the man accused of driving over 18 people near the United States-Mexico border on Sunday, a 34-year-old George Alvarez. Video of the incident showed a gray Range Rover traveling at a high rate of speed when it struck the individuals sitting on the sidewalk. Video of the aftermath showed numerous bodies severely disfigured, including victims who had missing limbs. With the road and the sidewalk covered in blood, the SUV ran a red light, lost control, flipped on its side, and struck a total of 18 individuals, said Brownsville Police Chief Felix Sadia during a press conference on Monday. It was further found that there were 6 fatalities on the scene and 12 critically injured. From then to now, fatalities have grown to 8. The investigation also revealed that the driver of the vehicle, has identified as George Alvarez, has attempted to flee the scene after the impact, but was held down by several individuals on the scene. George Alvarez, in the Brownsville local with an extensive rap sheet, Sadia added, he has been formally charged with aggregated with 8 counts of manslaughter and 10 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Sadia's suspect is the suspect of being held on $3.6 million bond. Police displayed a poster board that listed Alvarez's criminal history, which included aggravated assault with a deadly weapon 2 times, assault against an elderly or disabled, assault causing a bodily injury to a family member times 4, assault of a public servant, perjury of a vehicle 2 times, assault causing bodily injury, criminal mischief 2 times, driving while intoxicated, evading police detention, interference with police duties, public duties, obstruction of retaliation, possession of marijuana, resisting arrest, search of or transport times 3, and theft of property. Police said Aldridge was not cooperating and law enforcement is still investigating whether the incident was an internal criminal act. No, because this person has an extensive criminal history, he should not even be let out of jail. That's the problem. We're letting criminals out of jail before they learned their lesson. Nobody learns their lesson in jail, okay? The jail actually persuades you to do more harm when you are let out, so you can go back to jail. That's how it works. Making Jordan Neely... Okay, now, with that being said, we're going to be moving into the final article. We actually have the Federalist. We have Making Jordan Neely, the new George Floyd, is the next step in the left's war on America. If the veteran who restrained the homeless man is prosecuted, it will establish a right to terrorize the subway passengers and help revive the anti-racist assault on justice. Daniel Penny is not going quietly to the slander. The 24-year-old Marine Corps veteran who took action when fellow subway passengers were being threatened by a maniacal homeless person has lawyered up and will need all the lawyer help he can get if he hopes to avoid spending decades in prison. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg has assigned Joshua Stinglass, a veteran prosecutor who led the trial team in the case that prosecuted former President Donald Trump's family businesses, to conduct the probe that will determine whether Penny will be put on trial for killing Jordan Neely. But the decision won't be made in a vacuum. Liberal communitarist is already damning Penny as a citizen version of Derek Chauvin. Leftist politicians such as Rep. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, are accusing him of having committed a murder. And Democrat and New York Governor Kathy Hochul is saying Penny's actions were unjustified and demanding that justice be given to Nelly's family. Nelly is a 30 years old homeless person who died during an incident on a New York City subway train on May 1st, had a record of mental health illnesses, and had been arrested 44 times for criminal conduct, and had an outstanding warrant for felony assault on an F train stopped on the Broadway Lafayette Street subway station in Manhattan. He allegedly began acting in a threatening manner to other passengers. It was at that point that Penny restrained him and put him in what appears to on a cell phone video of part of the incident to be a chokehold. In doing so, it could be well argued that he prevented Nelly from committing other crimes against a fellow passenger. Video released Sunday also seems to show Penny put Nelly in a recovery position after Nelly was subdued and appeared to be okay. But the reason this case is already a cause of celebrity, leading to leftist demonstrations on the subways in an endless stream of articles in corporate media, that is Nelly's fate is blamed on the supposed indifference of the public lives of the homeless. Broader racial ramifications. Penny's fate will, as Peachy Conman wrote in The Federalist, be a test of whether young American men should dare to act courageously when others are put in peril. But there's even more at stake in this case. With Nelly being animated as the new George Floyd, the questions of whether Penny was right to restrain Nelly, or if he used inappropriate force to do so, are merely sidebars to a broader narrative about the American racism. Floyd's death became a metaphor for a myth about systemic police racism. Floyd's actions the night of his death, his criminal records, and the fact that his body was full of what might have been a lethal dose of fentanyl were dismissed and irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was that he was a black man, and that the cop who had, in an act undoubtedly courageous brutality, snuffled out his life, was white. In the name of a belief, however mistaken, that Floyd's death was just one of countless incidents in which blacks were being slaughtered, with the impurity millions took on the streets in a, quote, mostly peaceful riots that shook the nation. More than that, it set off a moral panic in virtually every sector of the American life that elevated the woke catastrophe of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, to a new secular religion, since accepted by the Biden administration as mandatory for every government agency and department that treats colorblind policies and even the goal of equal opportunity as forms of racism that must be eradicated. Parallels to the 1984 case. Penny's actions might, for those with a long memory of controversial New York subway criminal controversies, have more in common with those of Bernhard Goetz than of Chauvin. In 1984, Goetz opened fire at 4 black teenagers he was saying were trying to mug him on a number 2 train. In an era of rampant crime, Cortez was largely supported by public opinion and acquitted of attempted murder, though he was fined and sentenced to 6 months in prison for illegal weapons possession. One of the people he shot was paralyzed in the incident, later won a $43 million civil judgment against Cortez that, as of late 2017, still hadn't been paid. As racially charged as the incident was, nearly 40 years later, we are still living in a very different Black Lives Matter world. As any New Yorker who rides the subway knows how dangerous they have been made by authorities, willingness to tolerate the presence of threatening people, but someone who isn't a person of color is always going to be assumed to be in the wrong of any incident, any violent confrontation today. When that claim that America is an irredeemably racist nation is treated ungarnishable by the chanting classes. The prosecutor in the Kyle Rittenhouse case told him that, quote, everybody takes a beating sometimes, in that he had no right to defend himself against lethal threats from armed BLM rioters in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Penny's chances of winning a trial in New York City courtroom in 2023 are immeasurably lower than were Cortez left his campaign against justice. As such, and regardless of the facts of the case, campaign against Penny must be viewed as merely the next stage in a long-running leftist campaign against the justice system in which pro-criminal prosecutor like Bragg, elected with the help of leftist billionaire George Soros, are in the forefront. The sympathy for Nelly, which is framed as a compassion for the homeless, is akin to the so-called decoronation movement that takes it as a given that too many now non-white people are being jailed for the crimes and calls to defund the police. The prosecution of the ex-Marine will not just establish precedent that there is a right of a deranged drug-addicted person to terrorize others with impunity. It will also, like Floyd's death, or that one of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, or a dozen other equality dubious cases, be routinely cited from now on as proof of American racism and a reason for doubling down on woke policies that will further divide and racialize the nation. Now, I completely agree with this article because it's true. I mean, I completely agree with that. But that's going to sum up today's episode. Thank you all for watching. If you did like this video, please like and subscribe below because I do post new episodes of the show every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Thank you all for watching, and I hope they have a great rest of your day. And if you do want to, stay for the rest of the show on the members section of the Spotify podcast.